All right, so are you ready to dive deep into this whole US dollar thing?
Oh, yeah. Let's get into it.
I mean, it's pretty wild, right? All this talk about its future,
For sure, for sure.
especially with these articles you sent over, one from AP News
Uh-huh.
and the other from Politico. You know, they both talk about some pretty strong statements from
Yeah.
President-elect Trump about tariffs,
Right.
and particularly these tariffs that seem to be targeting the BRICS nations.
Yeah, definitely. His remarks have gotten a lot of attention
Oh, yeah.
on the international stage, uh, especially since we're seeing the BRICS bloc
Right.
actively expanding. You've got nations like Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE
Wow.
now joining those core members, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
It's a pretty big group at this point.
It is, and it's getting bigger. You know, we're seeing even more countries expressing interest, like Turkey, like Malaysia. They're all kind of lining up.
So it's not just a small handful of countries then.
No, not at all.
This is a pretty significant chunk of the global economy that's potentially pushing back against the US dollar's dominance.
Yeah.
So what is really driving this whole movement towards de-dollarization?
Well, it's kind of a mix of things, I think. There's definitely a growing desire,
Yeah.
among these nations to kind of take more control over their own economic destinies.
They want to be in the driver's seat.
Exactly. And they see this current system with the U.S. dollar on top,
Right.
as giving the U.S. this outsized influence on global trade and finance.
Oh, for sure. And Trump's recent tariff threats probably aren't helping to calm things down.
No, probably not.
It almost feels like a power play, like forcing countries to pick a side.
Yeah, I could see that perception forming, for sure. Especially given,
Yeah.
his history with tariffs, like how he used them
Right.
as a negotiating tactic with Mexico, Canada, and China.
Oh, yeah, during his previous term.
Right.
And, the AP News article mentions Putin accusing the U.S. of weaponizing the dollar
Yes.
through sanctions.
Yes.
And we've seen how those sanctions, especially those imposed on Russia after the conflict in Ukraine, they've really shaken things up.
Absolutely. They've definitely exposed the vulnerabilities of a dollar-centric system,
Right.
and they've accelerated this push for alternatives.
Okay, so can you give me an example?
Sure. So take Russia, for example.
Yeah.
They've been working on developing their own version of SWIFT.
Okay,
Yeah.
SWIFT, the global banking network.
Yeah, exactly. It's what facilitates most international transactions.
So they're basically trying to build a parallel system.
Right. So they can trade without relying on that U.S.-controlled infrastructure.
Makes sense. So if countries are looking for alternatives to the dollar,
Yeah.
what are some real-world examples of how this de-dollarization is playing out?
So we're seeing this rise in bilateral currency swaps between nations.
Okay.
Essentially, they're making agreements where they can bypass the dollar
Uh,
and just trade directly using their own currencies.
Interesting. So China and Russia using the yuan and the ruble.
Exactly. They've really increased their use of those currencies in their bilateral trade.
So instead of going through the hassle of converting everything to dollars,
Right.
they're streamlining the process, cutting out the middleman.
Exactly. And this isn't just happening in a few places.
So it's spreading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's popping up all over,
Uh-huh.
especially within the BRICS bloc and their partners.
Wow.
They're actively exploring ways to reduce their dependence on the dollar
Really?
and establish a more multipolar financial system.
Okay, so there's a clear push to move away from the dollar.
Yes,
But then on the other hand, the dollar is still incredibly strong.
it is.
I mean, even the AP News article quotes this Atlantic Council model that suggests
right.
the dollar is secure in the near and medium term.
Uh-huh.
So how do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory forces?
That's where things get really interesting.
Uh-huh.
The dollar's strength right now is rooted in a few key things.
Okay, I'm listening.
First, the U.S. economy. Despite, some recent challenges,
Sure.
it's still a global powerhouse. And then you've got the U.S. financial markets, which are deep and liquid.
So there's a lot of money flowing through them.
Exactly. And that attracts investors. And then importantly, many essential commodities.
Like oil.
Yes, oil is still priced and traded in dollars.
Okay, so even if countries want to move away from the dollar, they're kind of stuck with it for now.
Yeah. And it was.
Because it's so entrenched in the global system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that things can change.
Yeah.
And often they change faster than we expect.
It's like we're in this weird spot where the dollar is strong,
Uh-huh.
but all these powerful forces are pushing for change.
Right.
So if we look ahead, what are some possible scenarios for the future of the dollar?
Okay, so there are a few potential paths we could see.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, one possibility is that the dollar kind of weathers the storm and maintains its dominance.
So the dollar stays on top.
Right. And that likely means the U.S. keeps its strong influence over the global financial system.
Okay, so a win for the U.S. But would things actually stay the same?
I don't think it would be business as usual.
Really?
Yeah,
Even if the dollar stays #1?
I mean, the challenges to its supremacy, they aren't just going to disappear overnight.
So things would look different.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even if BRICS doesn't completely replace the dollar, their efforts could still lead to a more fragmented global financial system.
Okay, so what would that look like?
I think we'd see more regional blocs and alternative trading mechanisms popping up.
So instead of one big currency running the show,
Right.
we might end up with multiple currencies all competing.
Exactly. A more multipolar system.
And what would that mean for, like, everyday people like me?
Well, a more fragmented system could have both good and bad sides.
Okay, how so?
On the one hand, more competition could lead to innovation.
Okay.
And maybe even more efficient and accessible financial services.
So lower transaction costs, maybe more options for international payments?
Exactly. But on the other hand, there is. It could also create more complexity and uncertainty.
Oh, no, I hate uncertainty.
I know, right? Fluctuations between currencies could become more volatile.
Oh, so harder for businesses to plan and invest.
Yeah. And it could mean more confusion and higher costs for consumers.
Especially for travel and buying stuff from overseas.
Exactly.
So it's kind of a trade-off then?
Yeah. Potential benefits, but also some risks.
Okay, so let's go back to that other scenario we talked about.
You mean where BRICS actually creates a rival currency?
Yes, exactly. And it actually takes off.
That would be a huge power shift.
No kidding.
Yeah.
How would that impact everything?
I mean, if a BRICS currency or even, a basket of currencies backed by BRICS nations,
right,
if that gained traction as a global reserve currency, it could really diminish U.S. influence on the world stage.
So a less U.S.-centric world.
Exactly. And it could lead to that more multipolar world we were talking about.
Where power is more evenly distributed.
Right. So instead of the U.S. calling all the shots,
we might see a more collaborative approach to global finance.
Yeah, that's the idea. But of course, it's impossible to predict exactly how it would all play out.
Right, of course.
There would be winners and losers for sure.
Yeah.
And the implications would be different for different regions and sectors.
Okay, so some countries might benefit from a less powerful U.S.
Right.
While others might face economic instability.
Or have a harder time accessing global markets.
Exactly.
It sounds like navigating that new landscape would be tricky.
It would definitely require strategic thinking and adaptability.
For both countries and individuals.
Absolutely. Understanding how this new financial system works, that would be crucial.
It's like a big global chess game.
Kind of, yeah. With nations and economic blocs moving their currencies around.
To gain an advantage.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the dollar holding strong, the possibility of a BRICS currency emerging.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned a third possibility.
Right, a multi-currency world.
Yes. So what would that actually look like?
So in a multi-currency world, you wouldn't have one single dominant currency.
Instead, you might see several major currencies.
Like the dollar, the euro.
Yeah, the yuan.
And maybe a BRICS-backed currency.
Exactly. They'd all be coexisting and competing for influence.
So you could seamlessly switch between different currencies?
Right, depending on the best exchange rates or the most favorable terms.
That sounds amazing.
It does, right?
Like a world without the limits of a single currency.
But of course, there would be challenges.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. Implementing a system like that would require a lot of international cooperation and coordination.
Oh, for sure.
We'd need clear rules and mechanisms for exchange rates and financial stability.
Right.
And there would be technological hurdles, too.
Yeah. Making those transactions seamless and secure.
Exactly.
So it's a cool idea.
Yeah.
But complicated.
Very.
It seems like the future of the U.S. dollar is really up in the air.
It is.
So what are some of the key factors that will determine which path we end up taking?
That's the big question. And there are a few key areas to watch.
Okay, like what?
Well, the relative strength of the U.S. economy compared to other big economies is a big one.
Okay.
If the U.S. can keep its economy strong and keep innovating, the dollar will probably stay attractive as a reserve currency.
Right.
But emerging markets are growing fast.
Right.
And some experts think we're moving toward a more multipolar economic landscape anyway.
So the U.S. can't just sit back and relax.
No. They need to keep adapting and competing to stay strong.
Okay, so What else should we be paying attention to?
Geopolitical developments are going to play a huge role, too.
Oh, yeah. Like the tensions between the U.S. and China.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That could have a ripple effect on the whole global financial system.
And China's economy is growing, too.
It is. And they're promoting the yuan as an international currency.
Right. And we talked about the conflict in Ukraine and those sanctions.
Yes.
Yeah.
That situation showed everyone how risky it is to rely too much on one currency.
Especially when it can be used as a political weapon.
Right. And it made a lot of countries start looking for alternatives to the dollar.
Which could speed up the move toward a more diversified system.
Exactly.
So we're seeing economic and geopolitical forces all putting pressure on the dollar-centric system.
Uh-huh.
Are there any other, wild cards we should be aware of?
Well, technological innovation is always a big one.
Oh, of course.
Like cryptocurrencies.
Right. Crypto has the potential to disrupt traditional financial systems.
I mean, some cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are already being used for international transactions.
Yeah. And there's a lot of innovation happening in that space.
New technologies and applications all the time.
Exactly. So it's not just governments and central banks anymore.
Right. We've got these decentralized digital currencies in the mix now.
Exactly. It makes the whole thing even more complex.
For sure. It really highlights how much the global financial system is changing.
Yeah. The old rules don't apply as much anymore.
And the future is more uncertain.
Definitely.
This has been fascinating.
It has.
And kind of mind-boggling.
I know, right?
I mean, we've talked about shifting global power.
The rise of alternative currencies, even crypto.
It's a lot.
But what does it all mean for the average person?
That's the big question.
Yeah. How do we prepare for this crazy financial future?
That's what we'll get into in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, I can't wait.
We'll talk about some practical insights and strategies for navigating all of this.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive.
Here we are.
Into the future of the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
And we've talked about a lot of the big picture stuff.
Well, yeah.
Shifting global power, the rise of alternative currencies.
Right.
We even touched on crypto.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It really has. But let's get down to the practical stuff.
Yeah, let's do it.
What can the average person actually do to prepare for this crazy financial future?
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all these changes.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But there are definitely steps you can take.
Okay, so give me the good stuff. What are some concrete actions?
All right, well, one of the most important things is to stay informed.
So keep up with the news.
Yeah, keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening globally.
With the economy.
Uh-huh. And the political developments, too.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget about tech advancements.
Right, because that's moving so fast.
It is. The more you understand, all the forces at play,
the
better decisions you can make.
Okay, so stay informed. Got it. But how do I stay on top of all this information?
You don't have to become a financial expert overnight.
Okay, good, because I don't have time for that.
Right. Just start by focusing on the things that are relevant to your own life.
So if I'm worried about a weaker dollar.
Yeah. And how it'll affect my everyday expenses.
Exactly. Then what?
Start looking for ways to save money. Explore local options for stuff.
That makes sense. Focus on what I can control.
Right.
What about protecting my savings and investments? Any tips for someone who's not a financial whiz?
Diversification is key. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Especially when it comes to currencies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Consider holding assets in different currencies.
Okay, so maybe look into some of those emerging market currencies we talked about.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
Can I do that on my own? Or should I talk to a financial advisor?
It's always a good idea to talk to an advisor.
Yeah, especially if I'm new to all this.
Exactly. They can help you figure out how much risk you're comfortable with.
And develop a portfolio that's right for me.
Right. Because everyone's situation is different.
What if I'm more risk averse? Are there any, safe havens I can consider?
Well, gold has historically been a pretty reliable safe haven.
Yeah, when there's a lot of economic uncertainty.
Exactly.
Hey.
It tends to hold its value.
Good old gold, a classic for a reason. Okay, so we've talked about managing money.
Uh-huh.
But is there anything else we can do to prepare?
Well, think about investing in yourself.
Investing in myself? What do you mean?
In a world that's constantly changing, adaptability is key.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So focus on developing skills that are valuable across different industries.
Okay.
And even different countries.
Mm-hmm.
The more versatile you are, the better you'll be able to navigate any economic challenges.
So become like a jack of all trades.
Yeah. The writer/coder/entrepreneur.
Who can survive anything.
Exactly. Embrace lifelong learning. Stay curious. Be open to new opportunities.
I love that, because change is the only constant.
It really is.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive.
It has.
I mean, we've explored challenges and opportunities. We
have.
And hopefully given our listeners some food for thought.
Yeah, some practical insights, too.
Yes, for navigating this crazy financial landscape.
It's definitely a landscape that's changing.
It is. But I think the main takeaway is that while the future might be uncertain, we can still make informed choices.
We can.
Yeah.
And we can take steps to prepare ourselves.
By staying informed, diversifying our assets, investing in our skills.
And embracing adaptability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then we can face the future with confidence.
Even with all the uncertainty.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
It is.
To our listeners, thanks for joining us.
Yes. Thanks for listening.
Remember, the conversation doesn't end here.
Keep exploring.
Keep asking questions.
And stay curious.
That's the most important thing.